What's going on, y'all, and welcome back to another Epic 7 video. This week we should be getting the ML5 Selector or Headhunt, whatever you want to call it, part 2. And so it's time to be aware of what this system entails, as well as start prepping and just thinking about which unit you're going to be deciding on. Now remember, you don't have to pick just yet, as the selector still isn't quite here. It is coming very soon. And on top of that, I'm going to go over the system and how it works, and you'll see why you have time to think about it and really decide on which one. There is some RNG involved, but we'll go over all that in just a second. I have a tier list set up, and I'm going to cover most of the strong picks. And remember, a lot of things have changed, but this is a good time to talk about the best picks for this selector because of the Moonlight 5-star balance patch, or let me just say the balance patch that had 2 ML5s. A lot of people were waiting to see how those shape things up, and I think we can have a good impression on where those will align. So thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoy, and let's get into the tier list. All right, for those of you that aren't aware of this Headhunt event or didn't experience it last year, there is some RNG elements available or incorporated into this, and you will need to do activities to get points to, you know, find those most wanted ML5s. So you're going to have this board, you're going to do daily activities, weekly activities, you're going to uncover certain ML5s, you're going to try to headhunt and find the ones that you want the most. So there's a lot of RNG. Just be aware, guys, that I didn't see a single person not get their most wanted ML5 by the end of the event. It just might take some of y'all longer if you are unlucky. Those of you as well might want to wait just to see how things progress in terms of the current meta. Maybe your decision might change after watching this video, after watching a different video, after talking with your friends. So take as long as you need. This is a longer running event. Just be aware of the time frame and that you don't take too long. Just don't get overwhelmed, though. You can refer to my old guide here from last year. I assume things will most likely be exactly the same, and I have some tips and tricks on there as well in terms of, you know, maximizing your point game and re-rolling the heroes, etc. All right, let's take it from the top and start with the 2 units that are going to be receiving buffs here very soon. That's going to be Lone Crescent Bologna #1 and Death Dealer Ray. Lone Crescent Bologna, a very, very strong unit. A lot of people didn't think she needed buffs, and instead units like Blood Moon Haste, who's going to be here at the very bottom, guys, could have used it more. But regardless, she will be the one getting some touch-ups, getting some love from Smilegate, and I think overall it's going to be a net positive in terms of just how much damage she does, in terms of how much she'll counter, etc. I say I think because until the buffs arrive and until we have time to test it out, there are a few players predicting that it could be a big playstyle change because of the way the Soulburn is moved, the way that we used to play her in terms of just, you know, saving up for the Soulburn skill 3 and then having a very minor downtime in between the skill 1s. But regardless, like I keep telling y'all, I think it's going to be a net positive, and I think she's going to be better for 99% of players out there. So Lone Crescent Bologna is going to be moving up in the tiers. In case you weren't aware of who's getting buffed, she's going to be one of them. And if I had to place her, I would almost rank her probably even above some of these here that I'm going to discuss with y'all in a second, put her in the top pick row. A lot of that being because, 1, a lot of the buffs she's receiving are just general very, very nice. And 2, she slots against nicely. She fights against some of the most oppressive units currently in the meta. So yeah, I think she's going to be a very, very strong contender. And if you want to know, I would place her probably in the top picks section. Super quick announcement, y'all, and then I promise we'll get right back to the tier list. But Huawei is sponsoring this video, and they have an amazing promotion for you guys. Up to 30% off your in-game purchases on Epic 7. So if you want to save a ton of money, listen up. Huawei App Gallery has just launched an amazing campaign from now until November 24th that can save you up to 30 to 50%, like I mentioned, on all your Epic 7 in-game purchases. So let me guide you through the process and how to get these amazing money-saving deals. First, grab an Android phone or emulator, then open a browser page and head on over to the Huawei App Gallery, link in the description below. Next, download App Gallery and continue through the prompts. When asked, make sure to download HMS Core as well. HMS Core is going to make sure your game purchases are connected to your Huawei account. Now we're going to sign up and create a Huawei account using an email or phone number. An important note, when asked for your region, make sure to choose either Turkey or Switzerland, regardless of where you're located. This will give you access to the promotion. After this step, just a quick note, when asked for phone verification, you can change Turkey or Switzerland back to your respective phone code area. Now, install a new instance of Epic 7 via the Huawei App Store and make sure this is the instance where you make your purchases. Once finished, head over to the featured section and click the promotions icon. Quick note, if you're on emulator, you may need to use your emulator's rotate button or set your emulator to mobile mode. This month, we have a series of coupons offering up to 30% off your purchases, and these coupons can be redeemed every single day throughout the duration of the event. No limit, no tiers, no cap. Just to give y'all an example, let's look at this 200 Lira coupon. This pack is $50 US, and in lira, that's 1107. 1107 lira is equivalent to $39 US, $10 cheaper before any discounts. Then we add that 200 lira coupon, and our total becomes $32. Insane savings. One other sweet perk is that Turkey doesn't collect sales tax. You really won't find better savings than this, so help support me and your wallet at the same time. And there you have it. The process is fairly straightforward, but if you have any questions or need additional help, head on over to the official Discord, also a link in the description, and there you'll find tutorials and a helpful team ready to answer all your questions. Huawei also runs promotions on a regular basis and hosts giveaways on their Discord, so be sure to join. Leading on to Death Dealer Ray. This is going to be a little bit trickier too, guys, because it's a multifaceted buff. Not only is sleep going to be changed big time to be more effective against evasion units, so Death Dealer is going to get a buff in that regard, but on top of that, he's going through an almost entire rework. He's losing the focus mechanic. If you weren't aware of the balance changes, all of his skills are getting shifted around, and just kind of like Lone Crescent Bologna, I've heard that Death Dealer Ray mains enthusiasts some of them are predicting that it will be a nerf. However, I heavily disagree. And I do think overall, just like Lone Crescent Bologna, it's going to be a net positive. He's going to be way better, and a lot of that may be because of the sleep buff also included. But if I were to place this guy, I think he would go into the very strong tier, maybe in the middle, somewhere in the middle, yeah. But this guy, keep in mind, is going to be very good. I do want to talk about him real quick, though, more than Lone Crescent Bologna, because this is just going to be a strong unit overall. If you need a damage dealer that fights against some of the meta picks, she's just going to be even better than she is currently. Death Dealer Ray, I think right now, before the buffs, would be somewhere in like the solid tier. But after all the buffs, I think he's going to move up big time into the next tier up. But for newer players, he is still more niche in the sense that he's a kind of unique style of unit where he will control the battlefield. He does kind of like the weird injury and explosion, the detonate effects. And so for that reason, I think if you are newer or returning and need better picks or just simpler picks to use, like hyper carry damage dealers, like these two here, Conqueror Lilius and Meteor Quirk, in terms of their roles, utility and cleansing, are going to be super insane as well. And relatively, you're going to identify where you want to use those easier. That's why I think Death Dealer Ray might be a little bit more of a careful pick. Just be careful picking him, but just be aware as well that he's going up big time in stocks. All right, we got a lot to talk about, so let's keep moving on here, guys. We'll keep up the pace. Top pick next up is Conqueror Lilius, who I don't think I need to talk about too much, but she is still strong to this day. You might need a little bit of speed gear to run her well, but with how strong her kit is, you can build her in a variety of different ways. It doesn't have to be super fast. Still just an amazing opener. She will favor more aggressive playstyles, but like I said, with gearing, you could fit her to however your playstyle dictates. Just a strong pick overall. Just be aware if you need a damage dealer specifically, like Lone Crescent Bologna or Navy Captain Landy, to name a few, or like Lionheart Sirmia, then this is going to be, you know, more of a utility opener style support unit. Same thing here with Mediator Quirk, but this unit I always rate super high in any selected tier list that is aimed for newer or returning players. That's because he makes cleansing just so brain dead easy. He's also a insane toolkit of utility with his strips, his attack breaks, his CR push. You always have something to do with him that will provide value to the team. And he can be built in a variety of ways as well. Usable PvP, PvE, same with Conqueror Lilius, same with Navy Captain Landy. I'll kind of mention if they're only usable for PvP, but a lot of these units in general can be used in a lot of different scenarios, which is why I rate them so highly. Next up is Zeo. And Zeo, guys, I think most y'all are aware, is typically used as, or I think he was introduced as a speed contest unit because of how much free combat readiness he gets, so players can build him around the 250 range and even contest units at 300 plus speed. However, be aware, guys, if you are picking this unit to fight fast players will either pick them themselves or they'll pre-ban him, so you may not always get to play him in the way you want. Regardless, though, he is one of the best, if not the best, speed contesting units, and just used in a variety of playstyles, very, very good overall. Last Rider Crow I actually rate lower and lower on my normal tier list, but that's because I'm a tanky player and I prefer knights with more mitigation. Just like Conqueror Lilius, Last Rider Crow is going to favor more aggressive playstyle, so if you think that fits the bill, he's very good. Provides good mitigation. You can slap Orius on him if you want him to be the main mitigation tank on your squad as well, and if their opponent brings area of effect or multi-hitting abilities, he's just going to scale super well and can be a win condition all on his own. Very, very strong unit still, but I think the more veteran player you get, you will have to decide between him and other knights. Next up is Lionheart Sirmia. This unit, compared to the World Championship, the E7WC, I think is not quite as dominant as she was with the introduction of newer units, especially units like Abyssal Yufine. However, Lionheart Sirmia is still very good, and just like a lot of these other units, the newer you are, she's going to still maintain a very dominant spot at the lower ranks. And by lower, I mean anything below Emperor up to Champion. This unit is super, super good. Matches well nicely into a lot of the meta units like Conqueror Lilius, Navy Captain Landy, and can be built in a few different ways as well. So super strong unit, and I think very, very strong in PvE and PvP to boot. Briarwitch Isari, I think this unit is absolutely incredible. Does have a lean towards aggressive units, kind of like Last Rider Crown, Conqueror Lilius in terms of playstyles. However, she is so stacked in terms of her kit. She has Ignore Effect Resist to apply some of the best debuffs in the game. And right now, she's one of the premier anti-revive units. Rest in peace to Blood Moon Haste until he gets buffed. But yeah, just a super, super good unit. If you need that anti-revive, if you need a big damage dealer that also provides insane debuffs, that also can hit like evasion units on top of that, look no further. I think she will address a lot of your issues. So a lot of new and returning players should look at this unit. Go ahead and take a look at her skill kit, because there is so much that I could go over all of it, but we have so many to cover. Just be aware that Briarwitch is super, super strong. Spectre Tenebria. Now this one, guys, I've actually ranked lower and lower in terms of a normal tier list if we're just talking about power scaling. In the current meta at higher levels of play, she's actually hard to run right now because of her matchups into units like the hyper carries of the meta. Navy Captain Landy, Abyssal Yufine, all have reach. All can kind of reach her and deal with her. And she also doesn't deal quite as much damage in a super tanky meta that we are in right now. That being said, she still is one of the best units. If you guys didn't pick her up during your connection that every player starts with, go ahead and you could consider getting her here. Still very, very strong and should still be respected. One of the best stealth mechanics in the game. Good in PvE, good in PvP. Just be aware that she is falling off a little bit in terms of real-time arena. Ambitious Tywin, though, this one you might think is a little interesting. I could place him here, but I did want to put him in the top pick row just to highlight how strong he is in the current meta. So Spectre Tenebria is kind of falling off a bit. This guy is rising up. Now, he can be used as like your main mitigation knight. Slap Aureus on him, just kind of like Last Rider Crow. But I think the threat of his debuffs in the current meta with how many units could proc him in terms of what he does in his kit, in terms of the cleanse, and then the super strong skill 3 that can end matches on its own with a stun, the defense break. I think you guys need to be aware of how good this unit is for RTA. If your RTA is, if you don't play too much RTA or don't value it as much, then his stocks are going to plummet big time here, and I place him somewhere in the bottom 2 tiers if you don't play RTA. But if you do, keep in mind how strong he is right now. All right, guys, we're going to pick up the pace slightly, but we'll still take time to talk about these next row of units, as they're also very, very worth considering. First up is Bellion, and the reason I rate her a little bit lower than some of the top picks is because a lot of times your opponents will be banning her, pre-banning her if their draft is weak to it. And second, I do also think that other units are kind of seeing more light. I mentioned Spectre Tenebria kind of going down a little bit in just in the current meta, and other AoE hypercarry units like Navy Captain Landy are more preferable, where Bellion is going to be really where you want to bring against units like Spectre Tenebria and against units or players that are going to stack a lot of souls with Togga Hells, etc. She's still a beast to be reckoned with, and still has one of the best anti-souls mechanics in the game. So don't neglect it, but I do think you guys will get better value out of a unit that or not better value, but you'll get more playtime out of other units on this list if you need them. Next up is Martial Artist Ken, and the reason I rate this guy a little bit lower, even though I love this guy and I think he's finally, Smiley did such a good job balancing him, or buffing him I should say, is because he is very hard to build, and I do think he is hard to play as well. In the current meta, when he first got buffed, I think players were picking him very, very, very often and having great success, even picking him in the first pick slot. However, as time progresses, more players get used to him. More players can kind of build around if you pick him too early and just bring units that can, more or less go around him with single target, for example. Even despite, his new capabilities with his buffs, where he'll hit units that crit his allies. But all in all, if you have the gear to build this guy, he is so good in Arena, RTA, and Guild Wars, and I think he's almost back to his former glory. Just super, super fun to play. Just be aware of how hard it is to gear this guy. Next up, we have Solitary, and the reason I rate this unit so highly is because of her very coveted anti-focus mechanics. That alone will just force your opponent to respect her in terms of a ban, or just, they'll have to have one of their units, like Remnant Violet, for example, have part of their kit just completely nullified. On top of that, too, depending on how you build her, she can control and dictate the entire pace of the match, especially if your opponent does not have units like Meteor to Queric. So I think in terms of control, speed, and just the anti-focus mechanic, she should be a very, very highly considered pick. Just be aware she's not straight up like a cleanser support or a damage dealer, so you do have to pick her a little bit more carefully in mind in terms of overall team building. Remnant Violet. Now this guy, as long as you're okay, guys, losing 30% of your matches to just bad RNG, I think this guy is very, very good if you can build him with high tier gear. That being said, there will be matches that he'll just die in. There will be hard matches that he has to fight against, like Solitaria. Units that can hit evasion, like Briar Witch Iceria. So he does have a lot of hard matches, especially in units that can just strip his buffs, like Conqueror Lilius, and then destroy him. So depending on how much RNG and how much you want to build around him, I think his value will go down. But those of you that will believe in him, he is called the Gauge unit for a reason, and that's if you believe he can just 1v4 a lot of matchups. So this is going to be one that can scale very heavily depending on how your playstyle is and how much you're okay with RNG, but I do think he needs to be respected, and he's very good in other areas of the game as well, just like PvE. Now, Architect Lyca and Strays I'm going to talk about together real fast. Previous seasons, these two units in general were so oppressive. You would pick them in the last 2 slots of your draft, and they would almost destroy every opponent that didn't bring a contester, that played a little bit more standard or tanky, and they would just delete units straight up. Now I think there's a lot more counters available in terms of handling these two, and they're not as abusable as they were in the past. That being said, they are both still very, very strong nuke style units, so if you like that playstyle, very good. I think the edge will definitely go to Architect Lyca though. If your opponent doesn't have those units that can kind of stop what she wants to do, very, very strong, very effective. And then Strays will get a little bit more of a nod if you want to have like those PvE one-shots to flex. Not needed at all though, especially with 2x speed, so don't take too much stock in a one-shot mechanics. Next up, let's talk about Pirate Captain Flan, and I actually almost might want to put her in the solid tier. She is still very strong, but just the current meta, a lot of players are bringing units that can handle her. However, if you ever find an opponent that doesn't have any cleanse or not enough cleanse to handle this unit, she will be so strong and carry all on her own. Now, she does need the artifact. I'll put it on the screen. I believe it's called Star of the Deep Sea. If I'm getting that wrong, it'll be on the screen, but it is the Summer Iceria artifact that will allow her to plant bombs. If you don't have that, her value is going to go down a lot, guys, to maybe even the niche row. There are alternatives in terms of like burn artifacts and stuff like that, but I do think that is a mandatory if you want to keep her in this very strong tier. Next up is Faithless Litica, and I might even put her above Pirate Captain Flan. I might even put her above Architect Lyca and Strays, but it's really going to depend on your playstyle as well. I might even put her above Remnant Violet. So this is another unit that might scale up depending on how you play. But if you guys have artifacts like Guiding Light, for example, and you need a kind of pseudo-contester, just utility unit that can handle units like Meat-Eater Choleric, that matches well into a lot of the current meta, I think this unit scales up very highly. I'm just hesitant to rate her too high because I do think she does have a bit of a learning curve, and depending on how the meta shifts, she could go back down to being, you know, maybe down to the solid or even niche tier. But right now, guys, in the current meta, I do think she should be respected, and she's very good. So if you like her, this would be one of the best times to pick her up and start using her. All right. Up first in the solid tier list row is the Designer Lilibet. This unit I could see being in the very strong row for newer and returning players because she's a hybrid between strong cleansing and damage dealing. On top of that, right now in the current meta, her skill pushback or her skill reset on the skill 3 is very, very nice and relevant. I just put her in the solid tier row because a lot of times you guys might be better off just using units like Meat-Eater Choleric plus damage dealers instead of taking a hybrid, as there's a lot of utility and things that Meat-Eater Choleric will cover that Designer Lilibet may not. So there is a little bit of learning curve in how to use her, but if you like her, I still think she's very relevant to this day. Still usable even at the highest levels of RTA play, and then for every other mode like Guild Wars and Arena could be very, very strong as well. So solid pick, one I think most players, if they like her to boot, will not regret. Twisted Eidolon Charon is interesting. I think after his buffs, guys, I would even rate him here if this was a more normal tier list, but for what he brings to the table, in terms of just overall account usability across all modes, I think other options are going to be more solid. But if we're talking just in terms of performance for RTA, I think you got to put respect on this guy. I think right now after his buffs, he's actually very good, matches up into certain units pretty well, and the way they reworked his skill 3 I think is now so much more usable. I think time will tell though in the future how he'll really shape up. It's still relatively a new unit and relatively new with his buffs. Next up, guys, we have Desert Jewel Bazaar, who is also very good in the current meta. Has the very coveted Barrier Inversion. However, you want to build him pretty quick as well as probably play your team more aggressive and fast as well. You want to take advantage of that combat readiness push. And in terms of other Soyvers, he has less utility, I think, overall than units like Meteor to Queric, and his sustain isn't quite as good as, you know, dedicated healers. So for that, I think he is a little bit harder to play, and it really takes a certain nuance to play certain comps with him. But I have seen him pop up quite a bit in the current meta, so he still is quite strong overall. RC Shadow is a tricky one. I think Seal is still super powerful, but with Seal getting added to units like Knockwall, she's not quite as unique as she used to be. On top of that, the way to gear her will really depend on what kind of units you're going to fight against. So gearing her is a little bit tricky, and I think there is some RNG elements to her kit because you won't always have souls to ignore effect resist. So if you're relying on seals to deal with certain units, things could go wrong if you don't account for all the RNG, immunity, etc. I think if you do like how she looks, though, she is still super, super strong against certain matchups. You just have to play her a little bit more carefully. Apocalypse Ravi is one that used to be at the top of all tiers, guys, but is now in the perfectly middle spot here in the solid tier. And if this was a normal RTA tier list, guys, I might put her even lower because she is just so hard to run at the moment. Not a good cleave anchor, not good in standard matches, doesn't match up well into any of the hyper carries at the moment, and a lot of the top meta picks she just flops against. But if the meta shifts at all, she was one of the top bruisers for a long time for a reason, so I could see that shift. She is a safe option. I just think all of you should consider a lot of these other picks, especially in the top picks row, way before Apocalypse Ravi. But with her kit being as good as it is, things could shift, like I keep saying. But I do want to point to the fact that you might read in a lot of other guides players that aren't aware of the changes, or you might read an outdated guide that still has her at the top. Be aware of how far this unit has fallen. Sage Vivian has fallen in partial reason because of the fall of Apocalypse Ravi, one of her best matchups, and just currently she has just too many weaknesses. There's better AoE units, better carry units, and I think she, you know, still has so many weaknesses, especially with focus and the way units can bypass her defensive mechanics. That being said, she still provides some great buffs, still has AoE, still looks like a great look. It's still a great looking unit and probably better than some of these units in the niche row, but honestly she could be down here. I just placed her in the middle conservatively because just like Apocalypse Ravi, if she comes to power, this unit could see play again. Next up, guys, we have Dark Corvus here, who is still a very, very strong Guild War unit, one of the best if you just want to farm mystics and need a safe option, and still usable in RTA. But I think with the introduction of Lethe, I think Dark Corvus isn't quite as needed for the real-time arena portion. Still a great unit though, so if you like it, just be just be aware of his downsides, and that he's very boring and he's pigeonholed into a very, very singular playstyle where you want to tank down and really just nuke units one by one by outlasting. Last but not least, guys, in the solid row we have Requiem Rowana, who I think I rate very low here only because she's very hard to gear. There are some other downfalls to her in the current meta. The fact that Abyssal Yufine exists, the fact that Cleave is harder to run. But that being said, I think for Cleave, she still is one of the best options if you can gear her. And that's why she's at the bottom of the solid tier, though, is because it is very hard to gear her and even harder to gear her for newer and returning players. So just be aware of how difficult it is to get this unit up and running. All right, guys, from here on out, I'm not really going to talk too much about the last set of units. These are units that you should really, really avoid unless you love them. As you can see here, avoid unless favorite. I'll talk about a few in this row, as some of them could still have potential, at least more so than the bottom tier. But units like, let's talk Sageball and Sezin, just not as needed as he was in previous metas. You still might want to pick him up for his unique, cutting potential, but there's just better options in my opinion, and he's also really, really dedicated to RTA. Little Queen Charlotte is one that should be good on paper. I know a lot of players love this unit. However, units like Aiden just outperform her, and she's just tricky to run, sometimes not having enough damage to kill if she doesn't have enough buffs. Two, if you can just strip or, stun. Just very, very hard to run, and even when she runs properly, I don't think this is the best meta for her. The rest of the tier list as well, these are units you should respect. I think units like May Chloe could go up depending on how you play. Units like maybe Spirit Eye Celine is a nice last pick. Operator Cigarette, things like that. These are okay, but really be careful, guys, picking any of these as a new or returning player, as they're a lot more niche than the above picks. Last but not least, guys, we have the Avoid row. Just like this title says, avoid all these picks unless they're your absolute favorite. Most of this row needs buffs. They're just not good compared to the rest of the cast, even though a lot of them are fan favorites. They're just not quite playable in the grand scheme of the game. That being said, all units are playable to some extent, especially the lower ranks you are, so don't let me be one. I've seen players pop off with Arbiter Vildred. Rilla Light, I think, is even being used in the current meta, but for new and returning players, I think you'll have to work way harder making these bottom tier units work compared to the rest. And last but not least, of course, you cannot pick these 2 units. However, they're both very, very good. Abyssal Yufine, by the way, guys, has just been exceeding all expectations. So dang strong right now. But unfortunately, you cannot pick her. All right, guys. Well, that wraps things up. Once again, if you need any additional help, please leave a comment below, or even better, stop by my live streams on Twitch and now YouTube as well. So just pop in if you see me live, and I can help you additionally if you have specific questions or if you have to pick between 2 different units. All right, guys. I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace out, everybody.